on Chess24 and on Twitch. I don't think I'm live yet, but should be starting up pretty soon. Yeah, now I'm live on YouTube. So welcome everyone to today's session. The session is about the Sicilian Defense, which you probably have heard of already. Let me import. Oh wait, sorry for that. I didn't intend on doing that. Oh wait, what is happening? Something went wrong there. Okay, wait. Okay, sorry for the delay here. Now I'm more or less set up. Not sure what went wrong there. Okay, and let me set up the pieces correctly. Not sure what just happened. For some reason it went, did a couple of things a bit weird. I'll adjust the pieces, but today's session will be on the Sicilian Defense. You might have seen it. It's a black opening. So today's gonna be about black. Let me first check if I'm really live, by the way. I think I should be live, yeah. Yeah, I think I'm live, yeah. And today's session will, yeah, so as I said, it will be on the Sicilian Defense. And it starts with the move e4 and then c5. So this is also kind of specific already. We don't cover all the black openings. I did it actually in last week's session, where I was covering all the opening moves, or basically giving a couple suggestions which you can play as black against 1e4, 1d4, 1c4, 1 knight f3. So I basically covered all openings, and if you want to have a look, just have a look at last week's session where I covered a lot more. But today we are going to have a look at the very specific opening, the Sicilian. And let me adjust the pieces, by the way, to normal pieces. I'm not sure. Yeah, now everything is normal. So it starts, as I said, with the moves 1e4 and 1c5. And the question is basically, why is this okay for black? White plays pawn to the center, while black plays c5, which is not really helping in development. It only opens up with the diagonal for the queen. But usually you should not be developing your queen pretty early on in the game. So it seems a bit strange to be playing 1c5 because it doesn't really add much to your development. But the reason why this is an okay move is because usually you want to prevent your opponent from playing e4 and d4. So if you play a really random move like let's say h6, your opponent grabs the center with the move d4, and you are in some trouble with black because you've given your opponent a lot of space in the center, and this should really not be the way to go for black. For some reason I'm not seeing that on live, by the way. I'm not sure what's going on there. I'm just checking whether everything is going alright. I think I'm supposed to be live, but I'm just checking whether everything went the way it's supposed to go. For some reason I sometimes have some problems with this. So let me just check it out. Wait, I'm gonna get back to the Sicilian in a second. I'm just checking whether I did everything correct so that I'm just live. I think at least I'm supposed to be. But let me check it. Yeah, okay, so now I did get it. Oh yeah, sorry, the setup is really strange, yeah. Let me adjust it. I'm not sure what's happening. Okay, now it's all set up. I'm adjusting the board right now. Oh, sorry for that. Okay, this is, sorry for the strange start today. I'm not sure what was going on there. Okay, now we're set up. Sorry for that. Also, I can see myself live right now. So we're all set up. So what I was saying is that if you play 1e4 h6, you're giving your opponent a lot of space in the center. And this is basically what we were doing by playing 1c5. We were preventing our opponent from playing the move d4. So the main moves against 1e4 are 1e5, which prevents d4, 1e6 and 1c6. And the moves 1e6 and 1c6 are... the idea behind those moves is to play d5 next, and after ed5 you can take back with the pawn and still have the pawn in the center. So the idea of c5 is not to get the pawn to d5, but it's just to make sure that d4 won't happen. And the main response against 1e4 c5 is the move knight to f3, with the idea of playing d4 next, which is called the Open Sicilian. Black has a lot of ways to respond to this, but what I wanted to show is that after d6, d4 takes, white is ahead in development. He has already placed his knight in d4. He's able to develop both the bishops. The knight's about to get out, so he's basically kind of like an tempo up on development, because he's already able to develop this bishop while this bishop is still kind of stuck on f8. So we are already black, so we're already down a move, but we also are a little bit behind in development. But the reason why the Sicilian is playable is because the lack of development is being compensated by having the better structure. And it seems like white has a fine structure, but the thing is that strategically speaking, he has given up the d pawn for the c pawn, which is definitely a good trade for black. So what you can see is that in the long term, if black doesn't have any problems in the opening, is not getting checkmated already in the middle game, if he survives all that, we will have a great position in the endgame because we have the better structure. So one thing you should very often be aiming for is the endgame in the Sicilian, because you just have this extra center pawn, and yeah, you can very often just have a nice position due to that. So let's have a little bit of a look to which Sicilians exist, because there are a lot of Sicilians. So the main Sicilians, or actually what I would consider the main Sicilian, is the Najdorf, which starts after d6, d4 takes, knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn, protects it, and then a6. And this is one of the most famous openings of the game of chess. And that is because it has been used a lot by former world champions. It has been named after a very strong player of the past, who was called Najdorf, clearly. And the move, or the idea behind the move a6, is that you want to eventually go b5. You're also grabbing the b5 square, which could be annoying in some lines. So this is one of the main Sicilians out there, but there are a lot more. So the thing for white is that black has a lot of options in the Sicilians. Also white has a lot of options, so you need to know a lot from both sides if you want, especially on the top level, if you want to play this opening. The thing is that a6 seems a bit slow, but we're kind of solid with black. Okay, we're a bit behind in development, but we've only placed our pieces on the 3rd rank or below, so we're kind of, I wouldn't really call it passive, but we're still solid, and we have plans of becoming very active. One of the reasons also why we play the move a6 is that eventually we might want to play b5, and we just really want to grab the square here. So a6 is one of the main moves, but what also exists here is move g6, which is called the dragon. Very, very theoretical and very concrete, very sharp lines in the dragon. I think this is probably the most sharpest of the Sicilians out there. Instead of g6, we also have the move knight to c6, which I think is called the classical Sicilian. I'm not really sure about the name, because maybe it's called, yeah, I'm not sure. I thought it was called the classical Sicilian, and after the main move bishop g5 here, it's called the Richter-Rauser. Then we have the move e6, which is called the Scheveningen. A lot of outsiders have a very difficult time pronouncing the name. It's a Dutch name. It's used internationally, so everyone basically calls this the Scheveningen. But it's much easier for Dutch people like me to pronounce the name because it's a Dutch city. I think it was probably there was a tournament in the city in which this kind of position arose very often, and then it was called the Scheveningen. So these are main options after the move d6 here. But black is very flexible in this position. Black has a lot of other options as well. You have the move e6 and knight c6 as other main options. Even moves like knight f6 exist, allowing e5, which in general I don't think is a good idea. But here it might be kind of playable because we have prevented the move d4. But also a6 exists, b6 exists, g6 also exists, which is actually one of the more mainline ideas in the Sicilian. But as you can see, there are a lot of ways to play for black, and you really need to know your way around. Wait, let me play for black. Enlarge the board. Yeah, I could enlarge the board perhaps. I think this setup is quite nice. Yeah, there are a lot of options. G6 is called the accelerated dragon, or maybe even hyper accelerated dragon, because as we have seen before, the move G6 in this position was called the dragon. But there is a line that exists in which black plays with G6 without the move D6. Usually you play the move knight to C6, D4, takes, and then G6, which is called the accelerated dragon. But you can even do this even sooner. You can start with G6 already in this position. So we've got the dragon, then we get the accelerated dragon, and then this move G6 is called the hyper accelerated dragon. So this setup with G6 is definitely one of the main setups in the Sicilian. But there are also some other setups. There are Sicilians with the move E6. You can combine this still with the move knight to C6, but you can leave the knight in B8. There are simply just a lot of options. Here after E6 the main opening is takes A6, which is called the Paulsen Sicilian. And then we have the move knight to C6, D4, takes, and here there are some options. Actually the world champion Magnus Carlsen, during his World Championship match in 2018 against Fabiano Caruana, played one opening throughout the entire match, which was the Sveshnikov, which starts after the move knight to f6, attacking e4, so white defense with knight to c3, and then e5, which seems a bit strange, strategically speaking, because you are weakening the d5 square. And after the move knight to b5, it seems like white is controlling these squares, but the knight on b5 is a bit odd. Right now white is threatening knight to d6, so if black plays some random move, you play knight to d6, which is very annoying to meet because you don't want to give up the bishop pair so easily. So knight to b5 threatens knight to d6. Here the move d6 is played usually, and then the knight on b5 is a little bit strange. You can play bishop to g5, trying to control the d5 square, but after the move a6, knight to a3, b5, you can see the knight is kind of strange, and this makes this setup for black playable. The very strange knight on a3. White is still fighting for the advantage here. It's a very theoretical opening as well, but the reason why this setup is playable for black is because the knight is just so strange on a3. At some point it might go to c2 probably, where it will get active again, but it takes some time. So yeah, Sicilian I would definitely consider one of the main openings. It's basically one of the main openings, and as you can see it was played throughout the most recent World Championship match. So yeah, definitely one of the main things out there. I wouldn't consider the Sveshnikov one of the main openings on the top level until this 2018 World Championship match. Suddenly Carlsen played it in every single game. He had very decent results with it, and suddenly other people started to play the Sveshnikov more often as well, because it turned out to be a better opening than what people probably initially thought. So yeah, this was played in that championship. with the move e5 here, but also the move e6 exists, which is a bit of a strange system, because it allows the move knight to xe6 followed by e5, and this leads to very strange positions after knight to d5, knight to e4, because the square on d6 has been weakened, and if black does not manage to get a d6 or d5, then you are in some trouble. But I'll probably get to this later, because this leads to some very funky variations. And one of the things as well is that after e6, white can play knight to b5 again, because the d6 square has been weakened. And after the move d6, for example, we can transpose back into the Sveshnikov actually. After the move bishop to f4, d6 is under attack, so we need to play the move pawn to e5, bishop to g5, and if you remember correctly, we've seen this position before. This was the position we had with the very strange knight on a3, and actually in this e6 line we have transposed back to the Sveshnikov. That was because white wasted the tempo on playing bishop f4, bishop g5, while black wasted the tempo on playing e6 and then e5. So a bit of a strange transposition, but yeah, you can also play the Sveshnikov in this way, I guess. And one of the things in the Sicilian, which I think is very important, is that you don't want to allow white to play d4 and c4. So I talked about this earlier on. You have this hyper accelerated dragon, but this allows white to play d4, cd4, knight takes d4, bishop to g7, and then the pawn to c4. And what very often is the case in this Sicilians is that whenever white is allowed to play the move c4, after he has gone for the open Sicilian, I think objectively it's not a great variation of the Sicilian. So here basically white just has a nice space advantage. It's still kind of playable for black. Black is very solid, of course, and hasn't done much wrong yet, but he has allowed the move to c4, or the pawn to come to c4. So what you will very often see is that white can just continue developing, and you get this kind of position in which white just has a nice space advantage and should be better. So in general, the Sicilians in which c4 is being allowed, I would consider objectively not great. One of those Sicilians is, for example, if you play pawn to e6 here, d4, cd4, knight takes d4, a6, which, as I said before, is the Paulsen Sicilian. And this Sicilian is objectively probably also not entirely great, because it does allow the pawn to come to c4, which allows white a nice space advantage. And okay, these Sicilians are definitely playable. I've played them myself as well from the black side, but probably objectively it should be better. But the thing is, you know, nobody's perfect. Not even Magnus Carlsen is a perfect chess player. So a lot of things can still go wrong. And it doesn't really matter too much if your opponent is objectively better. We still play chess, you know, and we can still outplay our opponent. And I have to say that there's a big difference between this position and the position with the move with the g6 setup. Sorry, not this one. I meant to go to this one. The big difference is that we have played g6 instead of e6. So we go for a completely different setup. Because with the pawn on e6, we put the bishop on e7, which is a much different type of position. This is called the Maroczy bind, if you have the pawns on e4 and c4. And we go for the accelerated dragon setup. Well, if you play the position with the move e6, we get a completely different position. These type of positions are called the hedgehog type positions, and that is because after you play the move knight f6, knight c3, usually you play queen to c7. The main move is a3, preventing any bishop b4 ideas. And now usually, for example, the game continues with b6, bishop to e2, bishop b7, f3, e4 needed to be protected, bishop to e7, bishop e3, d6. and you go for this type of setup with black, and it seems a little bit passive, and it's probably objectively better for white, but it's still playable, very, very playable, I think. And the reason for this is that, okay, you have less of a space advantage, but it's very difficult for white to make progress. It's just very difficult to get any breakthroughs in. B4 c5 is just very difficult with all these pieces targeting the c5 square. It's very difficult to get the e5 break in because it's just very difficult to push for f4 because there are also pieces targeting this e4 square. So these positions are very playable for black because it's just very difficult for white to make progress while also keeping the position in control. And what I mean with control is that one of the main ideas for black in these positions is to push for b5 or d5. If black usually gets in either of these breaks, he should be fine. For example, if you get in the d5 break, everything gets exchanged on d5. White doesn't have its space advantage anymore because he has lost the c4 and e4 pawns. So usually if you get in d5 in these positions, you're definitely fine. Let's get a little bit into what type of player you need to be if you want to play the Sicilians, because the Sicilian is a very dynamic opening, I would say. If you compare it to, for example, 1e5, it's just kind of symmetrical, very even position, and not too much going on, especially in the opening. It's just very solid for black. And it's also especially very different from 1e6 or 1c6, because here black is putting all of his pawns on light squares. So it's very, very different than playing 1c5, because if you put your pawn on dark squares, you're going for more dark square control type of positions, while if you put your pawns on light squares, you're going for more the light square control. So I would say that e6, c6 are way more different than 1c5, and sometimes e5 can lead to some kind of similar positions than after 1c5. We've so far only covered 2 knight 3, but I'll get to other options as well. 2 knight 3 is not forced in this position, of course. But as I said, the Sicilian is a very dynamic opening. The reason for this is that you're lacking in development, but you have the better structure. So I've given a co-chess stream on the initiative, and the initiative is very important in all of these Sicilians. So especially, for example, after the move a6, we're lacking a lot of development with black. And that means that we have to get something back for this, and that is that we have a better structure. And that means that white needs to be very fast. He needs to try and checkmate us as fast as possible. If he plays it very slowly, then black should be at least fine. So for example, if you have black, I would really like to face moves like bishop to e2. You can answer this, for example, with e5. e6 is also a setup, but e5 is the main move here, I think. Knight to b3, bishop e7, castles, castles. And if they played very slowly, let's say rook to e1, bishop to e6, bishop to f1, knight to d7. They play some kind of slow moves, b5, and you already have a very nice position with black, and that is because you have the extra center pawn. So if white plays it very slowly against these Sicilians, you can very easily get a much better position. It's just so much easier for black to play in these positions because it's just very difficult for white to get a plan here. So the main plan in the Sicilian is to try and checkmate the black king, because you have the worst structure, so you need to do something concrete. So, and here you're not really going to be checkmating the king anytime soon. So black has the time to get in rook c8, b4, a5, a4, and eventually get in the d5 break. And usually what is kind of like a rule in the Sicilians is that if you get in this d5 break, you're probably at least fine. So d5 is very often a break you should be trying to go for. So one of the more typical ways of playing against a knighter, for example, is to play the move bishop to e3. And the idea behind this is to play queen to d2 and castle queenside. Usually black castles kingside because we've already traded the c-pawn. We're trying to go b5, so castling queenside is definitely a bad idea. Sometimes playable, but usually this is without the move b5. But in general, black just goes kingside castle. And that makes it already clear where white should be trying to attack. So the main, for example, the main idea for white is to play f3, g4, then get in g5, then go h4, h5, and try and checkmate white, black on the king side. Seems very dangerous because it just seems to be very fast. Let's say we play the move e5, knight to b3, bishop to e7, f3. G4 is already coming, so it seems a bit dangerous. But the thing is that we get in counterplay ourselves on the queen side. So for example, the main line of this line, it's just a very specific line. There can be a lot of different setups being played from the white side. For example, there are moves like h3. There is a move bishop to g5, there is a move bishop to c4. So this is just an example. But for example here, the main line is to play bishop to e6, queen to d2, castles, castles. White should play castles because g4 would allow the break d5. So you need this rook on d1 to prevent d5. If black gets in d5 again, you are at least fine probably. And so in this position, black is definitely fine because we get in the d5 break. So we play the move castles to prevent the d5 break. And now black usually continues with knight to d7, pawn to g4, b5. Main line is g5. And after the move b4, we are just in time to get counterplay on the queen side. And we are with black trying to checkmate with a5, a4. Maybe try to get in a d5 break while white is trying to checkmate like this. But it's just a very complicated position with chances for both sides. And I would definitely consider the Sicilian one of the main openings that you can play as to try and win the game. Because if we have a look at the first moves, c5 is definitely the move that is the least solid. It doesn't contribute to your development, and as you can see, you can very often end up in positions where both sides are trying to checkmate each other. Good question, by the way, by Rahul in the chat. Why don't we go bishop, knight to g4 after the move bishop to e3? So we had this position in which bishop to e3 was being played, and we can play the move knight to g4, which is actually a very common move, but you have to be a bit careful because the knight on g4 can also be a bit vulnerable. So the main line here is bishop to g5, getting the bishop to a bit better square. Black chases it, but he does weaken the king side, and you get this type of position which is very unbalanced, and probably black is more or less fine here, but it's just a line. The thing about knight g4 is that white can also start with the move f3 and then play the move bishop to e3 next, queen to d2, and still go for the same setup. So white can also prevent you from going knight g4. Actually, a very common way to make a draw in chess is this knight g4 line. Here knight g4, bishop to c1, knight to f6 back, and a representation of moves occurs, which is actually a very common way to make a draw in chess. But I think, yeah, this bishop to e3 setup is very natural for white, and I think this is actually the main setup that white has against the Sicilian. The thing is that against almost every single Sicilian, you can play this setup with f3, queen to d2, castle queenside, and then go g4, h4, g5, h5, and try and checkmate white. Try and checkmate black. It can, for example, also be played against the move e6 in this position. You can also just go bishop to e3 here, followed by the move f3, queen e2, castle, and then try and checkmate black. So it's a very universal setup. For example, here knight to c6. Here bishop to bishop to e3, knight to g4 is a little bit annoying. This actually is a line which is probably already bladder for black. But again, here you can start with the move f3, and after, for example, e6, you can still play bishop to e3, followed by queen d2, queenside castle, and try to checkmate. So I think this is a setup you will very often see because it's just very universal. It can, for example, one of the main openings against which it's being played is against move g6, because now it makes even more sense to do go for this setup. For example, if we transpose back to the dragon, which we've seen before, this position, now white can play the move f3, king to d2, castles as well. And the main idea is actually this time to play bishop to h6 and try and get rid of that bishop. So for example, one of the lines here is f3, castles, queen d2, knight to c6, queenside castle. Queenside castle. And let's say you play bishop to d7. Now h4 might be coming, followed by h5. At some point bishop to h6, try and exchange that dark square bishop. King takes, and then try and checkmate on h6. So this bishop e3, queen to d2 is a very universal setup. It's called the English attack. So this setup with bishop to e3, queen d2 has even a very specific name. So that is definitely an indication that it's a setup you'll very often see if it even has a specific name. But there are also a lot of different options for white. As I mentioned, for example, against a knight or you have this move bishop to g5. And this is a lot different kind of Sicilian than the bishop to e3 lines. But yeah, I don't know. In general, the Sicilians are very interesting. And I wanted to have a look at model games which show very typical ideas of the Sicilians and why the Sicilians are so fun to play from both sides, but also very difficult to play because they are just very, very interesting. Usually a lot of options for both sides and very, very much fighting chess. So I would consider after 1 e4 the move 1 to c5 to be the main option to try and fight for the win. If you need to win, or if you're playing, for example, for myself, if I play someone who is much lower rated, I would very likely play the Sicilian because I think it would probably give me the best winning chances because it leads to very uneven positions. And I wanted to have a look at some model games. One of the main or one of the most known players that has played the Najdorf as part of his repertoire for during most of its career is definitely Garry Kasparov. He's one of the maybe the GOAT, maybe the greatest of all time. So he's definitely a very, very well known in chess. And his main opening with black was basically the Najdorf. So I selected this game because I thought it showed a lot of typical ideas and interesting ideas for black in the Sicilians and how to play, how to set up your pieces, and just try to crush white. So in this game, it was Movsesian with white, very strong grandmaster as well. He played this move bishop e3, which is the English attack setup, and Kasparov played the move e6. These days, I think the main move in this position is the move e5. Maybe it has actually always been the main move, but it leads to a little bit different type positions. The move e5 kind of weakens d5, but it does allow the bishop to come to e6. So you do control the bishop, the d5 square with the bishop, and then you play knight to d7, bishop to e7, you castle, and then you go b5. So a little bit of a different setup than with e6, because the main idea after e6 is not to put your bishop on e6 because it's just not allowed. So you just play b5, and then you put your bishop on b7 instead. So definitely a very different setup and with different ideas. But white chooses to go for the same setup anyway. He plays the move f3. Black goes b5 already. Queen to d2. Knight to d7. Castles, bishop to b7. And this is one of the main setups in these positions if you play with the move e6. In general, if you play it with e6 and the pawn on d6, I would advise you to put the knight on d7 if possible. The knight is just in the Sicilian much better on d7 than on c6. One of the reasons for this is that very often white would like to exchange the knight from d4 against the knight on c6. And another reason is that the knight on d7 is just very flexible. The main maneuver, for example, in this position is to go to b6. And there it can jump to c4. It helps with the d5 break. It can jump to a4. But from the move from the square d7, it can also jump to c5. It can jump to e5. So very flexible knight. While the knight on c6 doesn't really help with the move or the push pawn to d5. So with the knight on c6, it's a little bit less flexible, I would say. So in general, if you can, try to place the knight on d7. So white followed the logical plan with g4 in this position. And now Kasparov is seeing the move g5 coming. And he wants to place his knight on a nice square. And in general, the knight on h5 is kind of vulnerable and not really contributing much in the center. So you don't really want to put your knight on h5. You usually don't really want to put your knight on g8 as well. So you need to find another square. And the square that you usually have in this position is the d7 square. That's already occupied by the knight. So the next move by Kasparov makes a lot of sense in this position, because he's just clearing the d7 square for the knight. And he already plays the move knight to b6, which clears up the d7 square, so that after the move, let's say white plays g5, you can then play knight to d7, and then eventually you can go knight to e5 and try to attack with the knights on the queen side. So the knight's already retreating to d7 to try and help out on the queen side. However, white played in this position the move queen f2. And it seems kind of natural, because white is actually threatening a trick already. He's threatening to play knight takes e6. Let's say black plays a random move. You play knight takes e6, pawn takes e6, and bishop to b6. And you are in some trouble here with black, because you just lost the pawn. So it makes some kind of sense, because it does threaten to win a pawn. But I would actually kind of criticize this move, because it doesn't really contribute to the attack. I think, for example, a much better move would be to just play g5. And then I think usually you do not want to allow b4 that easily. So a common move, for example, here is to move a3. And then you can play h4, h5, and g6. And you can try to crash through on the queen side. For white on the king side. One of the things I've played myself is usually just a3 in these positions, and it just helps to stop b4. You have to be careful from the white side though with this pawn push to b4, pawn push to a3, because whenever black does get in b4, you do open up the queen side. So in general, try to not push pawns in front of your king. So for example, very often, as I said, the king will go to the queen side. The king will go to the king side. So try not play h6. If you play h6 in, for example, this position, you have to be careful about h4, followed by g5. And as you can see, there's already a target on the king side. If you have to take, then the h-file gets open, which is definitely benefiting white. He wants the h-file open, he wants to try and checkmate on the king side, so he's definitely benefiting from the h-file being opened. So try not to push your pawns that easily. So white played the move queen to f2, which I think is a bit too slow. Kasparov went knight to d7, defending the knight, not allowing this trick, because now you can just take it with the knight, and it's protected with the queen. So this has been prevented. And now queen f2 seems a little bit silly to me. The move king to b1 was played. In general, king b1 is a good move in the Sicilian. The king is always much better on b1 than on c1. From b1 it protects the a pawn. And as you can see in the Sicilian, you have traded your c pawn for the d pawn, which means that you have this half open file for your rook. So Kasparov's next move makes a lot of sense to move rook to c8, and that's why you put your king at b1, because it's just very vulnerable on this file. So you have to be very careful with that. Here white played the following move, bishop to d3, and this is a move which I also would kind of be critical of. I think in an interview Kasparov was also very critical of this move. The reason for this is actually that very often the plan for black is to play knight to knight to c4, just to try and attack the bishop. The reason for that is, in general, you want to win the bishop pair, but especially in these neither positions, the dark square bishop is the best minor piece that white has. The reason for this is that you have a lot of pawns in the center which are on light squares, which makes sure that the bishop can very easily move along the pawns. While this bishop really does not have a great future, it's really stuck in its own pawn chain. So whenever black plays knight to c4, you want to take it with the bishop. You really don't want to allow the knight to stay on c4. On c4, it's just very close to your king, and it's just very dangerous. So I've heard this myself before. Basically, in these type of positions, the only job of the bishop on f1 is to take the knight on c4. You just leave it on f1. Whenever a knight lands on c4, you just grab it, and it should be a nice exchange for white. Okay, you do lose the bishop pair, but you get rid of your worst bishop, which is kind of an okay trade, I would say. And also, the knight spent like 3 tempi to get to c4, while the bishop just spent 1 move to try and take the knight. So it also cost black a lot of time to get the bishop. So the move bishop to d3 seems kind of strange to me, because now if you do play knight to c4, you have lost a full tempo. So bishop to d3 doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The reason why actually Kasparov criticized this move was also because it allowed a nice little move for black. I'm gonna ask you, if you are watching this stream, try and find the best move for black in this position, and it's gotta do with the attack. So what we're trying to do is try and checkmate white, Kasparov find the right move to try and continue his attack, and it's a very typical idea in the Sicilian. So try and find it. I'll get a glass of water myself. I'll be back in a second. So I'll let you guys think about the position, because it's just a very interesting position, and I'll be back very soon. Okay, I'm back. I hope you found the right move, meanwhile. Let me see in chat. Yeah, it has been found by Rook. And the move that should be played in this position, Howard also found it, is the move Rook takes c3. And if you already have some knowledge on the Sicilian, this should be a very typical move to you, because this exchange sacrifice is very common. The idea behind the move is basically just to ruin white's pawn structure. You give up a full exchange just to ruin the pawn structure, but the king in the long run will just be very, very vulnerable. And the reason for this is because black has already got his knights very close to the king side. To the queen side. So for example, you can already see the move knight to a4 coming, already threatening a devastating check on c3, which would win the rook back and also a pawn. You can see the queen coming to a5, maybe knight to e5, maybe to c4. Also an idea might be to play d5 to get the bishop diagonal open, but also maybe to try and get this bishop to d5. And there are a lot of ideas already for black in this position. So rook takes e3, if you're playing a Sicilian, is definitely an idea to remember. And in this position, it's just incredibly strong. The reason why it's just such a nice move is because Kasparov played the slightly slow move queen to c7. And usually when you sacrifice material, you expect something very concrete back for it. But this is actually more of a slow play by Kasparov. He's already attacking the c3 pawn. You don't really want to lose it, so white defends it with knight to e2. But Kasparov just continues with his development, and it seems a bit slow, but the queen side has been ruined already, and yeah, white is just not able to put his pawn back on b2. So the pawn structure will be ruined in the long run, and eventually after finishing development, Kasparov will start the attack, for example with some d5 push, maybe get the knights here to e5, c4, and it's just a long-term problem for white. Movsesian push, g5, castles happened, pawn to h4, knight to a4, and yeah, with the move castles, Kasparov finished this development. So now that all the pieces are able to participate in the attack, the rook is ready to join on c8, for example, and the king is more or less into safety. It's not in the center anymore. Kasparov starts the attack with the move knight to a4. And actually I would say that the idea is not even to take on c3, because it would be exchanging a very strong knight for a very passive knight. But the main idea is more that you just want to get the knight close to the king. For example, one idea that you can already see happening is the queen getting somehow to this a3 square and then just trying to checkmate white. So Movsesian as well didn't mind giving up the c3 pawn. He went bishop to c1. But Kasparov, rightfully so, didn't take on c3. He continued the attack with the move knight to e5 here. Trying to get the knight to c4, for example, but also he wants to push d5. He's just improving his position in general, just trying to get his pieces to better squares, and eventually try and checkmate white. h5 is being played, and now Kasparov played a nice move. I'll let you guys try and figure out what is the best move here, how black should be trying to continue the attack. It's one of the typical ideas, so if you see it, just let me know. Oh, sorry for that. So let me know if you find the right move here. Would be good to know, of course. It's just a very typical idea in these positions. You want to have every single piece participating in the attack, and that definitely helps out with it. And yeah, the right move in this position is the move pawn to d5. It opens up this bishop's diagonal. Also, it puts pressure on the center. And if, for example, white takes, you get the bishop to an even better square. From d5, it's participating in the attack. This knight is really nice. It's participating. This bishop is participating. This knight is also very close to getting to the queen side. So almost every piece is already there. Only this rook, but the rook will be joining soon as well. So you cannot really take it. So the move queen to h2 was being played, getting the queen even more to the king side, and also pinning the knight. But Kasparov just played the move bishop to d6, and suddenly you have some discovered attacks. So the queen is not great on h2. Queen to h3 happened. But white is really wasting a lot of time, and he hasn't opened up the king side yet. If he had gotten in a pawn push to g6, for example, he would have already been close to try and checkmate black. It's not checkmate immediately, of course. Black still has some resources, but it's clear that white is being a little bit slow. Kasparov here played the move knight takes d3, which seems a bit strange. But he's basically just trying to force his opponent to play c takes d3, because this would open up the king even more. Now the pawn is on d3 instead of c2, so the king has even less defenders. You cannot play rook takes d3, because then you take the pawn on e4, and the bishops get opened. The bishop can come to e4 or d5, and this would be really a disaster. So white took back with the pawn. And here white played the move, black played the move pawn to b4, opening up the b file for his pieces. Maybe get the queen in, maybe get the rook in. But it's clear that a lot is going wrong for white, because the the queen side attack is just really strong right now. White took on b4, rook to c8, king to a1, because black was already threatening to play queen c2. And not only did b4 open up the b file, it also opened up the c file. So it's just really a mess for white in this position. King to a1 happened, d takes e4, f takes e4, and now a nice little tactic, bishop takes e4. It just wins a pawn. If white doesn't take the bishop, then the bishop can retreat to d5 or f5, or maybe take the rook. So it would be really nice if white doesn't take. But if white does take the bishop, then we have the move bishop to e5, and white is just getting checkmated. This is actually a very nice checkmate. I'll let you, if you watch this show, try and figure out how to finish off black in this position. It's a nice sequence of moves, so try and find it. It's not too difficult, but just try and think a little bit here to find the right move. But it should be quite doable. Yeah, that's fine, Howard. If you have to watch football, go ahead. And Ishan has found the right move. Ishan suggested the move bishop takes d4. It's with check, so you kind of have to take it back. But now the following move is the nice move in the position. Queen to c1 check, forcing rook takes c1, and after rook takes c1 is just checkmate, because the knight is taking the b2 square. So this very nice tactic, starting with the move bishop takes e4 by Kasparov. Just basically finished off the game here. Movsesian played g6, but then he lost the exchange. He's down a pawn, and the king, he's actually not down a pawn, but the king is getting checkmated, and it's just really terrible position for white. Queen takes h1, bishop takes b4. Black's up a pawn now, and he's also checkmating white. G takes f7 happened. King to f8, keeping the f file closed, not allowing any counterplay. Queen to g2 happened. Rook to b8, threatening to play bishop to c3. And at this point, black is just finishing off white. And it actually ended up in a very nice position. Knight takes b2 happened. You cannot really take it back, of course, because then you're just getting checkmated in some way. I would say, for example, bishop to d2 is nice. Checking black with the rook. Checking white, sorry. King to a1 and then bishop c3 back. Knight takes, queen takes, and it's clearly getting going to be mate. So in this position, after knight b2, white played the move knight to d4, trying to play knight takes e6, but Kasparov just played knight takes d1, so that after knight takes e6, king takes f7, knight takes c7, he has to move bishop to c3, forcing queen to b2. But after you're just taking the queen, you're just up so much material. So after the move knight takes d1, knight takes f6, king takes f7, Movsesian just resigned. And it was a very beautiful game by Gary. And what you should be noticing is that at some point, basically black just had the initiative. After he played the move d5, white didn't manage to improve his position once. Black just kept on getting threats in the position. Here he is threatening d takes e4, for example, or knight takes d3 followed by d takes e4. So white played queen to h2. Now bishop d6, another threat happened. Queen to h3. Knight takes d3 is a tempo because white has to take back. b4, also having a threat to take on c3. Rook to c8, threatening queen to c2. and d takes e4, taking a pawn, so also with a tempo, f takes e4, bishop takes e4. So it's a very nice sequence of moves in which Kasparov showed how to play with initiative. He just kept on giving threats so that white could not improve his position, and eventually white fell apart. I want to end the stream of today with a different game. And this game was actually more of a game for white, because I also want to show the dangers for white, the dangers for black. The Sicilian is not always fun. You also need to be very careful. You're lacking in development, so white is trying to checkmate you as fast as possible, and sometimes white just manages to do that. So you have to be a bit careful as well. It's just not always black who is the one giving the checkmate. So in this game, the Knight was not being played, but instead the Scheveningen was being played. And the reason why I don't like the e6 move, and the reason why it's not played so often on the top level anymore, is because the move g4 is playable now. Usually in the Sicilians, g4 is not easy to get achieved so early on in the game. For example, if you play the move a6 in this position, you still have this g4 square covered with the bishop. So in this position these days, even one of the most critical moves is to play h3. So it's quite clear that a6 is a much better move than e6, because white has to already play such a slow move as h3 to achieve g4. But e6 allows g4 one go. And to prevent the immediate g5, black goes h6. And here usually I think, for example, the move bishop to e3 is just quite nice. We have achieved g4. Black has weakened his kingside already with the move h6. We can play rook to g1 next, h4, queen to d2, castle kingside, queenside, and just have the attack rolling with g5 and g6 to come. Instead white played h3, and I think this is a slow move, so I don't really like it. Black played the move knight to c6, bishop to e3, a6. Also here I don't really like the knight on c6. I think it would have been probably better on d7. Bishop to g2 was played. A big difference though is that if you don't place the knight on d7, is that you can put the other knight to d7. So that is definitely an advantage. And after the move queen to e2, black came up with a very nice plan. It's a very typical plan of the Sicilian, but it might seem very, very odd at first if you see it for the first time. Black played the move g5. It really weakens the king side, but on the other end, it grabs a lot of control over the dark squares. So basically, the idea behind g5 is to place the knight on e5, and then it cannot really get harassed with the move f4. In this position, white castle queenside, and after the move knight to e5, f4, pawn takes f4, bishop takes f4, you can see that it's just very, very difficult to get rid of the knight on e5. So this g5 push is a very standard idea, actually in the Sicilians, but you have to be very careful as well. You play the move h6, you play the move g5, you've played a lot of pawn moves so far, and white has completed his development already. So you haven't developed either of the bishops, you haven't castled yet, the queen is not out yet. White has achieved all of this, so you have to be a bit careful. Black hasn't really paid a lot of attention to his development, which he should have done. And here, after the move queen to a5, I would like to ask you to try and find the right idea here. I haven't named this type of idea in these positions, but I wanted to show a typical idea for white in the Sicilians, so that you also know what you can expect, what kind of moves your opponent might be playing. So try and find the best move for white in this position. It's a nice little move. So try and find the right move here. It's not such an easy one, but you have to take care that, or you have to think about that. black is lacking in development. So white has to be very fast in this position to try and win the game. You should not care too much about material. You're having the initiative. You're trying to checkmate black. So it's all about the checkmate and it's not as much about material. So the right move in this position is the very, or kind of surprising move, knight to f5. And this is actually very, very typical sacrifice in this Sicilian. And the idea behind the move is that after e takes f5, you kind of have to take it because the knight on f5 was threatening to take the pawn on d6, which is not something you want to allow. So e takes f5 happened, and then e takes f5. And now you can see what just happened. This bishop just got a lot stronger, but the main idea behind this sacrifice is mainly to get rid of the pawn on e6, so that you're able to play knight to d5. Knight to d. Oh, it's white to move. Black to move. So, for example, in the game, Rook b8 was being played because it's just very hard to find a good move. But now, for example, knight to d5 could be very strong, and the knight is just incredibly powerful on the d5 square. So what is also very often the typical idea is the other way around. So very often what you can see as well, or what happens very often as well in the Sicilian is, for example, knight to d5, e takes d5, and then knight to f5. So kind of the reverse of this just sacrifice we just saw. And now suddenly white gets this very strong knight on f5. Here it makes a lot less sense though to go for this because the bishop's diagonal is not open and also a2 is about to drop. So here knight to d5 doesn't make a lot of sense, but this sacrifice does. So pawn takes f5, pawn takes f5, rook to b8. And I mentioned the idea of playing knight to d5. The problem here though is that if you play knight to d5, the a pawn gets taken. So white just simply plays king to b1. The king is, as I said before, a lot safer on the b1 square. And it also just protects the a2 pawn so that you're able to play knight to d5 next. Black played the move b5. It's just really difficult to get a good move in. If bishop e7, you get the rest with the knight. So you cannot really castle because you drop the bishop. And if you place your bishop to g7, white just takes the pawn. Also, it's very difficult to remove the knight from d7 because you really want to keep the knight on e5 alive. So you want to protect it with this knight. But then it's very difficult to develop this bishop. The queen is already, doesn't add a lot to your position if you move the queen again. So it's just really difficult for black to find a good move. He played the move b5. But this allowed the very nice move bishop to c6 from white. Pinning this knight. And basically you're already threatening to play bishop takes e5, pawn takes e5, queen takes e5 with a triple attack on both of the rooks and the king. So yeah, black is just in a lot of trouble. He played queen to c7, protecting the knight on e5 once more. Bishop takes d7 happened. Bishop takes d7, but now knight to d5 jumps with the tempo. Queen to c4 happened. At least so far, the black position hasn't fallen apart completely yet, but it's quite clear that a lot has gone wrong. It's just a very passive position, and white is about to break through with the move bishop takes e5. Here, however, it cannot be played yet because of queen takes e2. So first, white just moved this queen up, and he's still threatening to take the pawn. Bishop to g7 happened to prevent this, but white spotted a very nice tactic here. White played bishop takes e5 anyway. The reason for this is that you cannot take back with the pawn, because probably what will happen is the move f6, blocking of the bishop, and then you take on e5 with check, followed by taking the rook. So white is in a lot of trouble here. Oh, sorry, black's in a lot of trouble, of course. And instead of d takes e5, you can also take it back with the bishop, which happened in the game. But now the bishop is pinned, so the square is not protected anymore. So knight to f6 happened. Black cannot take it because the bishop is clearly pinned, so he played king to d8. But white just takes the bishop, and after king takes d7, queen takes e5 would happen. At this point, the king is just very close to getting checkmated. You're also just down a pawn here, so a lot has gone wrong. It's just completely lost. So black still tried to move bishop to f4, but after queen to a7, the knight is protected, and you're still down a pawn with a very, very bad position. Black still tried rook c8, attacking the c2 pawn. He is maybe threatening to play, for example, move rook to c7 or queen to c7, trying to get the knight. But it's not a problem to give away c2, so knight to b6 was played with a double attack on c4 and c8. But the main idea is actually that after queen takes c2, king to a1, you are threatening checkmate with white with the move queen to d7. And that is the reason why black gave up in this position, because he's just going to lose material here. It's just very difficult to stop the checkmate. And for example, after queen c7, you have knight takes c8. But after rook to c7, you have the move queen to b8. Rook c8 would lose material. And king to e7 would also lose material. So maybe even knight to d5 is even stronger. But you get the point. You're just completely lost here with black. So you also have to be very careful not to fall behind it too much in development in the Sicilian with black, because as you can see, your king is very, very vulnerable in the center. So also pay a lot of attention to your development, and pay attention to these type of sacrifices that can tear open the position, after which white can try and checkmate you, because that's the main goal of the game. Try and checkmate you. It doesn't matter how much pieces you have left, as long as it's checkmate, you win the game. So that's probably the main idea in the Sicilian, to try and checkmate you. And white definitely did manage to go for that plan in this game. I hope you liked today's lecture on the Sicilian. I wanted to show this last final game to show some ideas for white. But I hope you enjoyed today's session. I'll be back for sure on CoChess. And yeah, I hope to see you guys another time.